it's just difficult to try to broaden your network, that quickly. So that's almost why I think it's a 10-year plan, because it will take that long to develop those kind of networks. So if I ever mention that I'm doing an MBA, always the first question will be, where are you doing it? And if I say I'm doing it at this school, then people nod and look pleased, and you can tell that the brand does have meaning. So
Jenny and I worked together in Eastern Canada for ExxonMobil many moons ago, and she was actually my wife's first supervisor as she started her career there.
And yeah, like you said, it's been a long time since we've seen you, but thanks to social media, it feels like we're still pretty connected. So that's
exactly
one of the awesome things about things today. So I was at ExxonMobil for almost 19 years as an engineering manager, and then I left at the end of 2020. Really just because I was increasingly concerned about climate change, to be honest, and sort of my role in being part of that problem. And particularly, I felt sort of Exxon, compared to some of the other oil and gas majors, was maybe not doing as much as some of the other companies. So that was what drove me to leave, and I'm just in the middle of working out what to do next right now. Since I left, there's been some changes with particular focus on CCS and the changes that there's been to the board. So it'll be interesting to see where the company goes to from here. But that was certainly the way I felt when I left at the end of November. I was motivated after sort of being misaligned strategically with where Exxon was headed. I was inspired to look into board roles because particularly in Australia, we don't really have a national policy for climate change. And so a lot of the progress is being made at the corporate level. And so just thinking that having people on boards that are making those strategic decisions is just so important for right now. And my previous role at ExxonMobil was joint venture manager, looking at non-operated assets. So a lot of that role is about influencing and oversight and sort of strategic direction. So I've been trying to move more into board roles. So that's what my position at AgriBio is. It's on the board, and it's a particular facility focusing on agricultural research, which is also a joint venture. And then, yes, I'm also studying an executive MBA at one of the major business schools here, and then also doing a graduate certificate in climate change policy at another university. So while I thought
not managing a full-time family at home, it sounds like you've got your hands full.
So while I thought that this would be sort of taking some time out, I've actually sort of signed myself up to so much that I'm kind of busier than I was when I was working, to be honest.
Like trying to take your skills from Exxon and communicate them to like future employers. I don't know. We can talk about kind of what, I guess, let me ask you more directly, like, what do you think you want to do next as a more full-time role when you get some of these things kind of under? Is it the board stuff kind of more full-time or multi roles in that? Or is there other parts of climate change or technology tied to that you're interested in?
Getting on boards is quite difficult. So I think that's probably more realistically like a 10-year proposition. That's what I'm sort of coming to the conclusion about right now. Definitely still mainly focused on tied to executives. I think as diversity becomes more and more a focus, then that's broadening a little bit. And so being young can actually be a bit of a selling feature, but also then still very hard to get into those networks.
Those circles. So it sounds like I'm trying to wiggle my way into venture capital, and it sounds like a similar thing where it's definitely actually mostly like an old boys club where you kind of have to, there's no real job. There is sort of job postings, but you kind of have to personally know people. And even though I'm like in Silicon Valley and close to where a lot of the companies are or the firms are, it takes a long time to build relationships and to get into some of those places.
It's just difficult to try to broaden your network, that quickly. So that's almost why I think it's a 10-year plan, because it will take that long to develop those kind of networks, especially coming from ExxonMobil, where networking was never really a key feature of our roles.
Well, it was kind of like internal networking. And I think it was one of the reasons why it was so hard for me to leave or to make the decision when we did was it's like your reputation and the network and your expertise are all tangled up like inside the company. And I did have this concern that it wouldn't have any value outside of the company. Right.
Yeah.
And there was some truth to that you did have to leave a big chunk of that equity behind, or like the we'll say social equity, but it also was kind of freeing. It did force me, like I had to kind of start from scratch in Silicon Valley to build a network and that, but there's a real skill in it, especially in this kind of, we'll say, modern digital world. Like there's a lot of people. It's like an important skill as part of building a career these days, at least.
Yeah, definitely. And I wish I had, started before I left, because it's hard to catch up on after, 20 years when you just suddenly appear.
Yeah.
And especially because I didn't grow up in Melbourne, where we live either. So, Melbourne has quite old ties to what school you went to and what university you went to. So I found that quite difficult as well, which is one of the main reasons why I chose to do the MBA here, was really for networking purposes, because the particular school that I'm doing has very strong alumni networks and strong ties to Melbourne. So that was one of the reasons I decided to do that. So if I ever mention that I'm doing an MBA, always the first question will be, where are you doing it? And if I say I'm doing it at this school, then people nod and, look pleased, and you can tell that the brand does have meaning. So I've started with the people that I knew in my sort of extrapolated network, and then meet them for a coffee or a Zoom chat. Quite often they'll suggest 2 or 3 other people that might be useful to chat to. So I'll go chat to those people and just go on from there. And now I'm starting to use even like links to this business school, other alumni who have graduated from there, use that as a link with a message on LinkedIn to try to connect.
I think the hardest part, what I see for people, is just putting themselves out there, and you don't need to do it publicly, but like to start to network, you do. And there is like a low response rate, although I think the more focused and the more work you put in, the higher the response rate. If it's kind of just a spray and pray method for applying or for networking, it just tends not to work. But if you're very targeted and put like a thoughtful, specific request in, you'd be surprised at how many people respond. I find the same thing.
I'm actually a member of a group here called Women on Boards. They run a workshop for CVs, for developing a board CV. But what I found through attending that is what it really was a workshop on being able to communicate what your transferable skills are. So I found that very useful. I did that almost as soon as I left, whether it was for board roles or normal roles. And that encouraged me to focus on the joint venture management side of things, which is really stakeholder management, but in terms of strategic decisions, and asset management in terms of strategic decisions. So when I talk about my transferable skills, that's what I focus on: stakeholder management and strategic, decisions or asset management. Yeah, I think people, like when I talk about that, people, they understand what I mean, but unless they've been in the oil and gas industry, I find they don't really understand the magnitude and scale. And so I still find that quite hard to communicate. I don't really know if it's possible, to be honest. That's why I liked your binder idea, because you're showing people pictures. Yep. So I think it's easier for them to grasp the scale of what you're talking about. Well, and one thing I'm finding in the MBA too, there'll be topics where I feel going in, I have no background, right? Like marketing's one. Like I've never done anything to do with marketing. But then you get in there and you realize, oh, well, actually a lot of part of this is strategy and just coming up with some frameworks for describing that strategy. So I've been, it's helped to boost my confidence for those transferable skills to go through the MBA and actually realize what a breadth of experience we had at a company like ExxonMobil, and that we actually do know all of these things, really. But sometimes you don't even really know what you know because I haven't worked anywhere else.
I actually tried to bring in, like, there was some middle ground. I think Exxon was too rigid, but Tesla was too cowboy. And I tried to bring like a little bit of structure into an unstructured world. And I think a lot of people were like starving for that, whether it was like a little bit of personal development, goal setting in like a team environment, tracking some KPIs, even just like organizing basic work activities, organizing like file structures and, all these kind of things, which seem trivial, but it's like what was common was also we were like reinventing the wheel on a continuous basis, which,
if you can find people that do have some oil and gas background that have transitioned themselves, maybe not even worked in the oil and gas background, but you see from their LinkedIn profile that they've had something to do with oil and gas. Yeah. Then that's another something I look for when I'm looking for people to target for networking. I was lucky in that we were a dual career family, and so my husband was working, and so we could afford to lose that second salary for this period of time. If we hadn't been in that position, then I'm not sure what I would have done, and maybe I would have ended up not leaving and staying, because it was a great role and great job and great benefits as well. So it was definitely hard to leave, even though I did have all of that motivation.
I think that's the hardest part I see. It's hard to leave something good, right? If you're compensated well, and it is a good company to work for, and it's hard to walk away from that, and it's especially when the future is kind of uncertain. You just don't, my story is obviously worked out, and I'm very happy with the outcome, but it's there was years of uncertainty, whether I don't know whether I would get a job in Silicon Valley, whether I'd be successful at Tesla, would I stay there, would the company survive? Even in my period, it had very tenuous periods of time. And that was really, it would have been easier to stay, but certainly you miss out on all this, growth opportunity. I think the other lens I tried to look at it through was, I'd been 10 years, I'd worked in the industry for 10 years. You've obviously worked a little bit longer, but I hope to work for at least 2 or maybe 3 more decades. And I was kind of leaving a lot behind, but, both you and I have a long time and a lot of value to continue to add. And I think that goes back to if I was going to retire in 2 years, maybe I wouldn't pivot then, but it's man, that's a long time to work on something you're not excited about, or maybe is even being harmful.